streaming. Okay, connecting live video. Go live. Oh. I have upgraded. Let's see. How's everybody doing? We're still waiting on some people. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. We're doing about 5 minutes late. Sorry about that. Hope you forgive me. And give me a check on the audio quality. Let's see how this session sounds. Yep. Just let me know how the audio balance is, like if I'm talking, if you can still hear me at this volume, or if I need to make some adjustments. And the quality, there were a few things with the quality, and yeah, forgive me while I'm eating a sandwich. I'm running a little bit behind today. Everything's kind of been running behind, which, how is that possible when you've been locked in your apartment all day? The world may never know. Tea or coffee? I'm like way too much coffee. Way too much. I need to drink less. I'm drinking decaffeinated coffee right now. The first days of the isolation period were pretty heavy, and I started getting these like crazy headaches because I'm not used to just being at home all day. And yeah, that was challenging. Vecino, what's up? I was like, Vecino. Which loud neighbor is it? Or both of you? For those of you on Loud Neighbor, they were, and still technically are, my beloved studio neighbors. Check out their music. Check out their Loving the Alien. If you go on YouTube and watch Loving the Alien, in my opinion, this was pretty ahead of its time. So, check that out. Bitus. Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start answering a few questions that I got, and we'll kind of go from there and see kind of what develops after going from there. So give me a second to pull up the photos on my, I took some screenshots of some questions. The first one that I want to address is this is a really good one. This is from Kangaroo 573. How you doing, Kangaroo? Why shouldn't kick drums be more than 3 steps, or why shouldn't kick drums be transposed more than 3 steps up or 3 steps down? And that's a very good question, because first off, it really depends on what you're doing to make the kick drum. If the kick drum is a sample, which I would recommend, instead of getting overwhelmed with like the synthesis, you can make kick drums in synthesizers. You can make great kick drum in synthesizers. In fact, a lot of the most famous kick drums are technically being created in a synthesizer. The 909, for example, that it's generating the kick drum sound in the drum machine. I forget, a lot of the sounds in the 909 are sample based, but the kick drum and maybe the snare and one other thing, I believe, are analog, which means that the sound is actually being generated. That's not what analog means, but in this case, they're generating the sound within the kick drum. And so because of that, because you're generating the sound, you can pitch up and pitch down those sounds a lot easier. But in this case, if you're using samples, which I still need to update the folder, we've got new samples coming from Dustin Zahn has contributed to some samples, and we have also Industrializer has contributed some samples, which are super nice. And Industrializer just needs to tweak them. He wants them to be kind of set into a right BPM so that you can just kind of plug and play with the samples and loops. So once he's getting that sorted, then that should come out. And then I've got a few more people that have stepped up to the plate with that. But in this case, let's look at our friend Chris Liebing's samples, okay? So if you just let's listen to this sample on its own, okay? So with this sample, I've got some buffer issues. I'm gonna back off some of this stuff. Okay, so the reason you don't want to, here's what he means. First off, for those of you who are just learning, pitching up the kick drum, transposing it 3 steps up or 3 steps down. Here's your little transpose feature in the sampler, or with the waveform. You can transform every waveform. And you could also, in the case of this, let's go in here, and you've got, let's just show a sample of a tom, because I can't find, here we go. In the sample of the drum machines, or the drum racks that you have, if you go into the sampler right here, the transpose feature or function is here. So if you transpose this, this is right now at 0, so that means it's not being transposed at all. And I'm also transposing the wrong, so let's go here. You can start hearing it get frustrated. And the reason why it's, first off, again, there's no black and white rules. So you can do whatever you want. The reason why you've probably been cautioned against that Kangaroo 573 is that once you start pitching up or pitching down samples, then you're going to start degrading the quality with how you pitch it. So let's say, for example, let's just look at the frequency here. Pull up an EQ8. And we're gonna probably right around 50 hertz with this kick drum from Chris Levy. If you start pitching it up, you start deteriorating the quality because every sound has its kind of fundamental frequency. And once you're transposing stuff, you're actually stretching out the frequencies, you know, and you're also losing some of that transient. The transient is what is, right, these little spikes here, right? That's going to be the transient. And you start degrading that. So you're much better off finding a kick sample that is the right pitch to begin with than stretching it. If you were to stretch this, what I would recommend doing, if you like the sound of it stretched, say for some reason you like the sound when it's pitched up 8 steps, what you would do, or what I would suggest that you do, roll off that frequency, and then just use the top part, because you're gonna, and then if you can find something that kind of goes, that complements in the low end with that, you're gonna be a lot better off than pitching stuff up. Anytime, and I used to pitch up kick drums, and I used to do this a lot more, and in non-club environments, non-big sound system environments, it tends to, your mind can kind of play tricks on you. And it's gonna say, okay, no, this sounds really good in this environment. It's got plenty of bass and everything, but then 9 times out of 10, it's gonna fall flat. So that would be my reason for not pitching up a kick. But what you can do, what's up, dog? Come here, jump up. We have a guest in the room. One thing that you can do is if you have a drum synthesizer, like that Kick 2 plugin that I use, that's actually generating the low end. So pitching it up just changes the pitch, and it doesn't deteriorate the quality, whereas pitching up a sample would. Hope that answers that question. The next question would be how to create tension in a track. That's from Connect Two Things on Instagram. And let me pull up a session that I thought of where, I'm gonna pull up a session that I thought of whenever it talked about tension. And I'm gonna show you, it's a track that I released this year. No, it was last year. What? Yeah, I think it was last year. Which in internet years, that's like 17 years ago. I released it on this label Materia, and I'm gonna pull it up because I think that this will help create a sense of creating tension in a track. If I can find this one. We're gonna mix down to unmastered. Yep, there we go. So hopefully it doesn't make my computer take a dive too much. But we'll pull this up, this session. Ozzy, do you want up? Come on. Come on. No? Come on. See the little dog in there. It's probably more fun to look at him than me. Yeah, it's loading up the session. Hopefully it'll pull up. One thing that I would do to create tension while this is loading up is I would encourage you to try to filters are such a powerful tool with adding and subtracting energy. And it's not only a powerful tool, it's a subtle tool. So of course you can create tension by like washing stuff out with reverb or, you know, cranking up delays and stuff like that. But I feel like that it's like, yeah, it's something more obvious, and you can create a lot of subtle tension by simply filtering stuff in and out. Don't get me wrong, with creating tension, you would use reverb. I would suggest using one way, and it's just, this is not gonna work. So, gotta force quit this. What I would suggest doing, create a pad in Ableton, go to operator or analog or anything. Pull up a pad preset if you don't know how to create a pad. Start with like a C4 or C5 note. And you're gonna wanna roll off kind of any remaining low end of the track. And then you're gonna put some reverb on it. You're gonna bring up the attack, and then you're going to use the filter to kind of bring in to raise the tension. And then you're gonna, whenever you don't want the tension anymore, then you're gonna lower it. Sorry that I was not planning on Ableton crashing. So while that's loading up, I'm gonna try to answer some more questions. How do you soften up claps? Transient shaping with Ableton inbuilt effects. That is from Alfonso out of Porto, Portugal. How you doing? What I would suggest, first things first, if you're using a clap with a sampler, I would simply just back off the attack a little bit. Don't need to report that crash right now. I would back off the attack. So let's pull up and let's do this. Let's pull up. Let's see. Okay. I need to plug in this little power connector. Otherwise the screen will be too dim. There we go. So, okay. If we can fade in. Let's change the mode to classic. Or one shot. Let's fade it in. That's one option. I'm trying to just use push so it's a little bit more interesting. But if you go to the classic mode, and if you notice, so you bring up the attack on the clap, right? Now it's kind of hitting at a different point. It's kind of peaking at a different point. So that's one option. The other option is, within Ableton, it's not as easy. If you're compressing things, be sure you don't make the attack too fast or it'll make it even more snappy, okay? There's one plugin, and a lot of times this thing goes on sale for really cheap. Again, it's Plugin Alliance. I feel like I've recommended them a suspicious amount of time so far in these workshops, but they just make good plugins, and I'm not working for them. I love their plugins, and you can use this SPL Transient Designer Plus. Again, all of these plugins at Plugin Alliance, they can be super expensive. But if you just hold out and you're patient enough, then they can be pretty nice. So you can get it for a pretty good price. And this is, I'm not really that technical in the studio, actually. It's funny, I'm doing these workshops, and I hope you're getting some out of it, but there are so many people that are so much more technically savvy in the studio than I am. I just have made enough mistakes over the years that I figured out which things work for me and which things don't. And this thing, what I love about it is it's just simple, super simple. So you've got this transient shaper, and someone actually asked about transient specifically. So do you hear that? Like, you can really add in stuff. Let me just solo it. Do you hear the difference? Absolutely amazing plugin. This emulates a piece of hardware that is God knows how expensive. So this thing, I think I got this thing for like 30 bucks when I bought it. And it was a low enough price to where I thought, you know what, this might be snake oil, but it's low enough of a price that I'm gonna give it a shot. And lo and behold, it's an amazing thing. I also use this for kick drums, because what sometimes happens is a kick drum at the beginning of a track where it's not so busy, if there's a lot of attack on a kick drum when it's not so busy, it sounds kind of weird. And for me, I like kick drums that sound a little bit rounder. That's just a preference for me. But if you have a really attacky kick drum at the beginning, it sounds really harsh. But then if you have too round of a kick drum, then when the track gets busier, sometimes the kick drum can actually get lost in the mix, and that can also be a problem. So let's just throw this not on this. We'll mute. Let me put this on here, and you'll be able to really hear the difference. Super subtle. After I just said you'll be able to really hear the difference. Super subtle. Do you hear the difference? It might be hard to hear it through streaming because I know the bit rate's not always the best quality, but so especially 808s for me, and this is an 808 kick drum, 808s for me are really hard to mix well. And especially when you have different levels of intensity with the track, sometimes the place that it sits in the mix is going to be really different. So what I would do when I would go to write this out for, let's just do this. Whoops. So as I would render this out, I've got the transient designer plus right here. If I have it here, right now it's at 0, so that means the attack is just as it is. But as the track starts getting a little bit busier, I might start creeping up the transient designer, and that's just going to be like a rough example, and you can see what it'll do when you automate it. So obviously, and then you see the knob change here, okay? For those that don't know what automation is. So yeah, that would be my suggestion for how to soften up the clap. And also someone asked, what transient designer plugins there are. So the next question would be, what can help except right EQing against muddy mixdowns? That's from Nick Villau on Instagram. Nick, the thing about muddy mixdowns, actually, I covered this a little bit in the last Facebook Live, I think. The myth about muddy mixdowns is that EQing can solve everything. There's two things that I would look at before you even touch an EQ. First is look at the two or three parts that are muddying things up. First, make sure they're in tune with each other, because no matter if they're not in tune with each other, the second you start shaping it with an EQ, there's going to be so much energy lost. Because if you have two things, if you have a 50 hertz kick drum where the fundamental frequency is 50 hertz, like an 808, and then you have a bass line that's like 53 hertz, the thing is if you in order to EQ that to get the mud out of the mix, you're basically going to have to fundamentally change the sound. And if you're going to fundamentally change the sound with an EQ, why not change it with pitch? Pitch up the bass line, change the note, from maybe move it up a few steps. And this is why it's so important to start making sure everything's in tune at the beginning of the track. It'll save you a lot of heartache later on. And then another thing is play with the volume levels. Michael Klein, he posted a tip on Instagram, he contributed to this, and he gave really good advice that I would agree with, and that is try to lower the volume of sounds. Try to cut things instead of boost things. Sometimes especially when you're in the studio and you're kind of rocking out or whatever, and then things are sitting kind of muddy. The tendency is when the kick drum's not punching through, the tendency is to raise the volume of the kick drum, when really the best thing you might be able to do is to lower the volume of the bass line. And then things get a lot less confusing through that. Let's see if we've got any, I hate how on Facebook Live, it does not scroll through the questions. Can you take us through making V1 Jupiter, that kick, hi-hat, and that synth? Live and still my intros. That V1 Jupiter. Someone, is that the track? I don't remember. Is that the one with the how do you describe a techno track? Is it the more like dance floor one, or is it the kind of weird eighth note one? I don't know. One thing that I'll say about, I appreciate that you like that track. The goal that I would encourage everybody to do is, it's important to watch what people are doing with their favorite tracks that you enjoy or whatever, but it's also super important to figure out the fundamentals of production. And once you can build on the fundamentals, then you start to, there's a really powerful thing when you learn enough about production that when the things click in your head and you start playing around with synthesis or something and you say, oh my gosh, like, I'm a big Nine Inch Nails fan, mostly pre with teeth, but will always go to their concerts that I can. And one time I was just playing around in the studio and I made the bass line for the song Sin that's on Pretty Hate Machine. And it was like this, it was such a proud moment that I could do something that my musical idol did. And the way that I did that was by diving into a synthesizer and learning how it works. And when I started taking guitar lessons as a kid, of course, I just wanted to know how to play Nine Inch Nails songs. The problem with that is that you never develop building blocks with that. You never develop a concept for. I just feel like there's a better foundational approach than saying how can we. And there's lots of useful YouTube channels that'll say like, how do you make a track that sounds like this person's track? And yeah, and it's really not me hiding. I can't even quite remember which track you're talking about, but it's not me hiding secrets, obviously, because I'm trying to pull up old sessions of mine that are crashing the computer. But I think it's much better to focus in on, instead of trying to just perfectly emulate a song or a sound, instead of doing like a kind of paint by number, to really dive into the actual creative process and then discover how to make a song like your favorite artist. Discover how to make the bass line that Nine Inch Nails use, you know? And that's just my personal approach. There's plenty of people that would argue with it, but, Drew said that Transient Shaper is only $39.99 right now. You're welcome. Man, I'm making some money for Plugin Alliance. I wish I got a cut. Creep the Transient, KG. Okay, now I'm gonna go through and answer some more questions. And feel free to ask them in the Facebook chat as well. How do you create tension in a track? We already covered that and it crashed my computer. If Connect Two Things is on here, did that answer the question about creating tension in a track? Hopefully. Maybe not. Let's try another session and don't save. That's a really taunting pinwheel now that the font or the mouse is really big. Blind Observatory in the house. Michael Wynn's in the house. Vincent Neumann. Vincent Neumann. Wanting to know about layering kick drums. That's an important thing. And in fact, I'm just pulling up a session here that does layer kick drums. There's a couple things. First off, it's a misnomer. I mean, the thing that's really hitting you in your chest with a kick drum is obviously the low frequencies. A trick is, though, sometimes there is energy in a kick drum that is not needed. And I used to just say, okay, the more bass, the better. Oz, do you want up? Do you want up? No? Okay. The more bass, the better. That is not true because a track, when you are pumping a track through a sound system or through a master bus on a Ableton or Logic or any of these things, there is a certain amount of energy that can fit through those two channels. And what I mean by that is you want to conserve energy in any way that you can without fundamentally changing the track. So in this case, now I got that thing pitched up. I was wondering why I was acting weird. So this is really, this has a lot of nice power to it, right? But let's have a look on the EQ. First thing here, these frequencies, I'm gonna just do this guy just to show you an example. Like, if you look next to the mouse cursor, you can see where, what frequency it is. To be very honest with you, digital music's a little bit different than vinyl. When you cut stuff to vinyl, it gets rolled off at a certain frequency because if the bass is too deep and too powerful on the super sub low end, the deeper the bass, the wider the groove has to be. And if you cut the bass too deep on a record, it'll jump out of the groove. So they always have to accommodate with that. But it's actually a good rule of thumb. People always say vinyl sounds better. What they really mean is they like the way it sounds better. It does not sound, from an accuracy perspective, it makes no sense to say, okay, we made a track in Ableton and then we printed it to vinyl, that it sounds more accurate. What they might like is that there are a lot of problem frequencies of a record. For the record to be cut, the mastering engineer has to roll off and treat and pay attention to a lot of the problem frequencies that you could still have in digital music. So that could be one thing. And then just, it does change the sound, but anything that you like about the way vinyl sounds, you can make sound that way digitally. So it's a cool bumper sticker, but it's not really the case. But on this kick, these frequencies, like 20 hertz, I'm getting like, it's going up to, there's definitely some energy down here on this kick drum that is absolutely not necessary. And you can see where it peaks right here. So that's like around 54 hertz, right? This is a lot easier to do, by the way, whenever you're listening on actual speakers and you know how it feels. But I prefer doing like a 12 dB roll off, and I believe that is what the Ableton low pass is by default. But like, I'm not really changing the fundamental sound, and I can actually because I'm rolling off that super subsonic frequency that you're never gonna hear in a club, you're never gonna hear on a finished product. If you roll off that finished, those subsonic frequencies, you save a lot of energy, because bass and low frequencies take up so much bandwidth and so much energy, okay? Like bass frequencies, like a kick drum, is like streaming a Netflix video, and a hi-hat is like sending an email when it comes to bandwidth and how much space they take, right? So if you can get rid of all the frequencies you don't need in a kick drum right away, then that's a very positive thing. So I've got this thing rolled off gradually, because sometimes if you do it too sharp, it can change the, but I mean, in this case, I'm listening on very flawed headphones, but yeah. And you can see what it does. Look at what it does with this, I'm pointing at my screen and you guys can't see me pointing at my screen, but look what it does behind where the roll-off point is. And once I engage it, look how much. So actually, when I'm rolling off that frequency at the bottom, I'm taking away energy, and it's making the kick drum sound more powerful, because the energy is being more focused in the right places. So let's see. Vinyl rolls off some highs, adds a bit of white noise, needle crackle. Sounds warmer here. Let me just give you, Andrew, I know what you're talking about. There you go. There you go. There's some crackle for you. You can have it all day. But yes, the vinyl does change the sound of a track. Like the track side by side in digital and vinyl format, they sound different. To say it sounds better or to say it sounds warmer is a bit too broad for me personally. So Thomas Joseph, do you follow any certain formula for productions? I get super frustrated all the time. That's the only thing that really is always constant in my productions. But formula, I really try to start tracks differently, and not just with a different instrument, but with a completely different, instead of, sometimes I get so caught up in writing out the notes, and like I've said in earlier sessions, I'm not really a musician. So, I mean, I make techno music. So some would argue with me about that. And I'm a musician in the sense that I make techno music, but I can't get up on stage and play an instrument for people and not have them boo me off the stage. But what I always do try to do is to approach something, to do something that would just completely change my approach. And techno is so much about building a groove that you can build a groove with a lot of different things. So let's just use this kick drum for example. Right now it's a kick drum. Now it's that's brilliant. Let's add some overdrive on it. Vincent, what's a diss? I didn't diss anything. Didn't diss anything. Insert MIDI track. So now I've turned this kick drum into kind of a bass line slash groove. And I can, let's go to drum hits. Let's just keep going back to this guy. I'm going to mute all these other channels. I mean, it's not a perfect little bass line, but it's just, I was just doing that to kind of illustrate that the beautiful thing about electronic music, and I take what I say about me not being a musician with a grain of salt. It's just a different way of doing music. Like, I always think of like pianists or people that play trombone, how incredible it is that they've got this one instrument right in front of them and they have to make magic happen with just that sound palette, with just that instrument. And the beautiful thing about electronic music is if you're not feeling really inspired to make a drum loop, then you can just go into a sample and just destroy it and turn it into something. Like, there's so many different ways to produce music and to create music digitally and electronically. We're super lucky. I mean, like, if a guitar player is not inspired to play guitar, I mean, I guess they have like their pedal boards and stuff that they can mess around with, but they're kind of stuck. They have to use that instrument. And in electronic music, you have such a wide variety of approaches that you can do, that all it takes is, it's very important to not get so caught up in like an assembly line process because then all tracks start kind of sounding the same. Like, if you always have the same process, don't be surprised when all the tracks are going to start to sound the same. That's just, again, my take. So let's see. Oh, Vincent, when you said I'm not a musician, I make techno music. Yeah, I kind of borrowed it. There was this famous baseball player when I was a kid, and he always chewed like massive amounts of tobacco. And after a game, he was signing autographs, and a parent was like, his name was John Kruk, and a parent apparently went up to him and said, "Hey, you're a role model. You shouldn't be chewing tobacco. You're an athlete, and kids look at you." And he said, "Excuse me, I'm not an athlete. I'm a baseball player." And I just thought that that was great. And techno is kind of the same way, right? Do you follow? Thanks for doing this. How do you put your perks hats in the stereo field? Sorry, I'm not pronouncing that right, I don't think. Forgive me. But it really depends on again, it's the full energy of a track. And a lot of times what I do with panning, there's like creative panning, which if you listen to like a Plastic Man track or something where there's like one tom that feels like it's on the left side of the room, and then the complementary tom that comes in after it hits the right side of the room. That's like what I would call a creative method of panning, where it's really doing something artistic with it. And then there's the mixing component of panning, where if you put everything through the center, it's going to get really crowded. And so things that aren't necessarily so crucial to the actual groove of the track, I'm much more interested in putting off to the sides, you know? So, and what I kind of do is in the studio when I'm panning something, like let's go here. Oh, let's delete that. I've got to freeze a few things. I got a little too confident on this session. I've fixed the audio, some audio buffer issues, but not enough to get away with everything. While I'm doing that, I'm gonna answer some more questions. Spaß, I hope that question answered the question. Okay, Manu, I hope I said that right. In melodic techno, you need more warmer, less high-end kick. What's your route? What route do you take on that kick? Do you sidechain every I think mid-range is what you were asking? As well as get cleaner kicks. How do you give it more thump, like 80 hertz frequency without sounding unnatural? See more. Thanks. Oh, that's all I had to say. You're welcome. Wow, it's a hard question to answer because every track is different. Something that I do with when it comes to mixing more melodic sounding stuff is, let's see if I think there's actually a little bit of a melody in this track that I started working on. Let's see. Okay. put this back to normal. That is not what I wanted. So, let's just restart this session where I didn't mess with it. Don't save. Always save new versions of your sessions. Otherwise, you might get disappointed, and saving new versions of your sessions isn't going to take up any real additional space. So I'm going to show you, Mano, I'm going to show you a little trick that I do with mixing more melodic stuff, and I hope it helps. Okay, so I keep messing with this. So I decided to kind of ditch this part of the track, but I'm going to pull it back up to give you a little bit of an idea. So for this, what I'm going to do, if you listen, put an EQ on this track, the melodic part, if I can find an EQ. And basically, just listen to it, put on a high pass filter, and you can cut this pretty hard, right? So just roll up the filter. You see all that energy right here, all unnecessary energy. So roll up this until you start hearing the sound tangibly change. So, and then bring it back a little bit. Like all that rumble down there, you don't need. And that frees up so much energy on the track to have more space for the low end to come through. With Mano, so Mano, I don't sidechain. Again, sidechain is two different purposes. Sidechain can be a creative tool, and it can also be a mixing tool. I don't try to rely on sidechain too much as a way to mix. The better way to do it is to get every sound in its kind of right frequency range, because if you start, in order to sidechain enough to really get especially with melodies and stuff, the melody's gonna sound different when you're sidechaining it a lot of times. In order to sidechain it enough. So the better thing is to EQ out the unnecessary frequencies. You don't want to change the fundamentals of it. Get it in the right tune, and then you should be off to the races. Can you, Matteo, can you comment the technique of sending your track into filtered compressed reverb in order to create some kind of kick, some kind of rumbling effect? Yeah, Matteo, yes, you can. One thing about running kicks through reverb, it's one of those things that sounds really cool on small speakers, and it can sound really muddy on big sound system. One of the reasons is reverb is a stereo effect. So the first thing, if you're absolutely gonna do it with, if you're absolutely gonna run your kick through reverb, turn it into a mono, or at least the low end on mono, like in this plugin here. the utility plugin, you can, there's different, you can decide if you want to have them turn it to mono, or you can go to bass mono. Okay, make sure anything you're doing with if you're using reverb on the low end, make sure the bass is in mono. Because another thing to consider is speakers in clubs a lot of times are ran, the subs are ran in mono. It's a mono signal on the subs, and then the tops are stereo. But again, reverb can be very deceptive. It can sound really good in the studio, not so good in the club. If you're going to do that, take, let's say this kick. Let's just use this guy, leading muscle, okay? There we go. Now, oh look, I've got a second one right here. So, same kick drum, right? So what I would do is, I'll just, for ease of me keeping track, I'm gonna put this on the second channel. Duplicate the kick, roll off the bass completely on the second kick, okay? And then if you're gonna do reverb again, you're gonna put the reverb sound here. Let's just see what it, just random reverb. Notice, look at the audio form on the second kick. You notice how it's the right channel is getting a little bit more love than the left channel, and that's because it is a stereo effect. And when you're dealing with kick drums, I just always think things are going to be much better with with turning it to mono. So let's put the utility plug in. Make sure you put it after the reverb, because the kick is already on a mono signal. And what you can do is then filter this down. Vincent, I haven't forgotten about your layering kicks comment. And another thing that you do want to do if you're doing this is set up a compressor. We talked a little bit about compression. Sidechain. Do the, let's rename these so that we don't get them. Let's call this the OG kick. And let's call this the layered kick. Vincent, this is kind of gonna talk about what your question is with layering kick drums, but it's just, in this case, it's using the same kick. So here's the first one. There's the second one. And the reason why I do that is because if you start reverberating the low end, it starts getting, you just start introducing a lot of mud. And the reality of it is that you don't really need that. You're much better off, you have like a dry signal. So now we're gonna squash this a little bit and bring the attack on the compressor all the way down. You want it to compress immediately so that the transient of the OG kick, we're calling it, can punch through and it's not crowding it there, right? Here's another trick. If you're once you're dealing with two different kicks and layering them, now, even though these are the same kicks, they're being processed very differently, so it can have kind of a different effect. If you look on these little, in Ableton, there's all these like I/O, you can turn on and turn off these things, usually done just to make more real estate for your screen. But then you've got this D here, and the D is the track delay. And normally what the track delay is for is if you're recording hardware into the computer, there's gonna be some latency, and so you just nudge things in a different direction. But what you can do for this is you can play around with the reverb signal and just see if offsetting it by like a couple milliseconds can have any impact. If you're layering kicks, then a lot of times the phase of the kicks can be out of phase, and you don't want that, because if things are out of phase, then they'll start canceling out, okay? That's a really simple thing. If you have questions about phasing, just do a YouTube search on studio phasing issues. For example, I had a friend, it was a miracle that he was able to produce with this, but the first time when I first met him, he had a studio room, and the room was so small and so strangely shaped that you literally could not hear the kick drum in the studio. And I was like, oh gosh, it sounds so bad. How do you, he's like, oh, I always use my headphones or I just turn on one speaker so I don't have an issue. And then he moved to another apartment in another city. And I said, hey, how does it feel to have your speakers where you can actually sound the kick or hear the kick drum now that you're in a different room? He said, I still can't hear the kick drum. And I said, man, those speakers are defective, and I'll tell you how they're defective. There's a positive and a negative terminal on every speaker. And the positive and the negative, the positive's telling it to push, to extend out, and the negative's telling it to come back. And those positive and negative terminals, if you switch those positive and negative terminals, they're doing the opposite. So someone must have been really hungover in the M Audio factory when he made these speakers, and one of the speakers was wired out of phase. So literally it was playing the same kick drum out of the speakers, but while one speaker was pushing, the other one was pulling, and it was canceling out the sound so that you couldn't hear it. So yeah, that's what phasing does. And that's an important thing to consider. Hey Kyle, can you come in? Jorg Freiheit, Jorg, how are you? Long time no see. All these options can also be confusing, especially in the beginning. Yes, this is very true. So ask me some very basic questions and I'll give you very basic answers. I promise. This is beginners. I want to feel welcome here, and I'm just answering questions as they go along. Semi-creation related, do you think we're going to move away at all from the giant kick, reverb, rumble, bassline style techno that's been really popular for the last 5 years? Music always goes in cycles, Andrew, and music always comes and goes, and eventually, if you stick around long enough, your favorite type of music's gonna come back. And it's very important as you get older to remember that I might have heard 90s techno records before, but someone's hearing it for the first time. So don't piss on other people's fun. And I have to remind myself that as well a lot of times. So, Thomas or Tomas, depending on where you're living, when do you know you're absolutely finished with a track? Do you ever make a track elsewhere, load it into Ableton, and put final touches on it? Thomas, I never really feel finished with a track, honestly. And at some point, you just have to understand that you've listened to that track hundreds of times, probably by the time you're done with it, or at least a few dozen at the very least, if you have a really good idea and you're running with it. And you're gonna notice things in this track that a lot of people aren't. And a lot of times the things that you interpret as a mistake or a flaw of the track are gonna be what other people fall in love with about the track. Great example. I'm telling too many stories, so I'll just save that for later. But trust me, sometimes the flaws of the track are what makes the track. As I understand it, Cher is the person who, a Cher song is what really set off this auto-tune vibe. And there was a studio accident. It was, the auto-tune was, the thing about auto-tune was you're not supposed to hear that your voice is being corrected. But if it was being so drastically corrected because, as I understand, someone made a mistake in the studio and the producer came in and is like, that's a hit. So there you go. What synth does the pad? How long ago did you hear that? Let's see. I'm gonna take out that reverb, but I was just showing you what to do. This pad, or let's see. This mouse wheel is, I just pulled this out of. Vincent, it's an operator preset, actually, that I tweaked a little bit. So yeah, let's see what other questions we've got. Yes, I think it was the do you believe in love? So there's I'm using a kick drum as the bass line on this track. And just having it hit, I've got the attack turned, actually I don't have the attack turned so much up, but maybe I should. But because it's on the downbeat, I don't really need to worry too much about it. But I might. I'm actually gonna sidechain this this kick as I played around a little bit with it. It's starting to kind of crowd the kick drum. I'm gonna put this in the group as well. I tend to group the tracks. If you highlight the tracks, and then you can group them right here. I tend to group the bass and the kick. That's just it's not required. It's just something that I found helpful. So I'm gonna sidechain this. So you can have two different bass lines, and it completely changes the energy of the track just by making the bass melody shorter. Not sure which one I like more. Alejo, am I saying that right? Alejo Deck. Can you speak about the hi-hats, please? How you combine, what effects you use in this? Thanks. I'm getting this question a lot about how you process stuff, how you, what effects you use, what reverb and stuff. The best thing you can do is get the source material good. Okay? Effects are just going to be things that are like, it's like the spice, you know? It's like, it would be kind of like saying, what kind of ketchup do you use to make your food taste good? Like the first thing you would say is, well, cook the food right, you know? And then if you need ketchup, then two questions to ask. What kind of ketchup would be relevant? But maybe the first question to ask is, why do you need ketchup? Right? Why do you need sugar in your coffee? I don't have anything against putting sugar in the coffee, but you know, you go to those like really pretentious coffee places, they don't let you put sugar or milk in it because their coffee's so perfect. Some people just like sugar, but that's what I would say is check your source material. Get your source material as good as possible. And then start, if you need to process it and shape it, then it's really good to do that. But the ideal thing to do is to get your source material in place. What I can show you, making hi-hats is super easy, and it's way less of a science than making kick drums is. So let me just run this. Right now I'm running this is a sample. Okay. But let's delete that. Let's put in operator. It's gonna sound crappy for just a minute, but bear with me. You probably don't want a telephone sound. So, I'll spare you that noise real quick. There you go. It is one operator. I mean, this is a very basic hi-hat. It's one operator sound. Let me, like, these are all disengaged. You've got operator. White noise. You could try the noise loop to see what it's like. And then you can shape the envelope however you want. So yeah, you can start playing around with that. And that way, that's kind of like your little foundation. I'll even take a little screenshot so you can look at it. And I'll just drop it in there. If I can find the, show and finder. Let's see if this works. Aha. Can I drag it in there? Is that possible? No. I'll drag it in there afterwards. I'll reply to your comment and drag the screenshot of the really basic hi-hat and operator. Christoph, how do you find the ideal decay sub bass? I often end up with the problem that the low end is not differentiated enough, or the track doesn't seem to roll. I hope you know what I mean. It's a bit hard to explain. I think I know what you mean. So let's go up to this real quick. So 9 times out of, you just got to decide what which you want to get the kind of body from, the bass line or the kick. So on this, even this is a little bit muddy. So another thing to think of when you're in, again, I always am making a differentiation, Christoph, between studio and club. The tracks that sound really, really good in the club err on the side of tightness, okay? If you can make stuff sound really tight and have everything have its own space, always going to translate much better in the club. So consider that. Let's see what other questions we've got. Still really confusing for me to use 2 screens. Do we have any? Okay, what's your favorite kick plugins, EQ, coloring? Yeah, so many plugins. That's, I mean, I've got here all the plugins, and you know, the important thing to remember is every Thanksgiving, every plugin goes on sale, and they do these Black Friday sales, and then you get emails, and then every year I'm like, this is the year that I am gonna feel complete as a producer, and this one plugin that I've always needed to make my tracks sound amazing is on sale, and by next week, I'm gonna be killing it in the studio. And then I buy that plugin, and I'm still the same producer that I was the week before. I just have one more tool to choose from. And never, like when you listen to like a producer, like take like someone like Quincy Jones, he didn't have plugins. He did, I mean, like all of these things that we have, so many things, so much more to choose from than the person who made Beat It did, you know? And so, like, out of the box, Ableton can do so much more than almost any of the best-selling records of all time. Some of your favorite records that you grew up listening to, Ableton can do out of the box 10 times, 20 times, 100 times more than what those studios had to work with. So don't get too worried about a plugin. I like FabFilter Q3, and I love it, but I used Ableton's stock EQ8 for most of my production life. So don't worry too much about it. You can always write me and ask for something that you're looking for, but I want to really emphasize that a plugin has never changed me as a producer. I will say that Push, like actually different tactile things have changed my workflow. I started using Motorized Faders in the studio, which I really love because you've got your hands on the faders and you can do a lot more creative stuff with that. But you've got everything you need. You've got everything you need there. So yeah. Are there any other questions that people have? That this has been really good. I've really enjoyed just answering questions instead of, sometimes it can be tricky to go through the process of going through on a track and the workflow of it. But one thing that I do want to come back to, someone had asked about creating tension. And this track, I never really deployed it. But I don't think I'll use it on this track. But let's see what we've got here. Let's just unfreeze this. And I've got an auto filter here. I'm going to turn down the rate so we can kind of build tension ourselves. If you just have this go, let's turn on device on frequency. It's a really simple pad. I've got it pretty rinsed out with reverb. And slowly that'll climb up, right? And then you can bring it back down, and that's a really, really simple way to create tension. Way too loud, but that's okay. I'm gonna spread this out a little bit. This is something Alexander Kowalski taught me a while back. Instead of actually panning the entire frequency, a lot of times he uses this. If you look on the EQ 8, there is left-right mode, there's stereo mode, and then there's mono stereo, okay? Left-right mode allows you to say, okay, I want to affect, here's what I want the right channel to look like on the EQ, and here's what I want the left channel to look like. And this way you don't displace the full spectrum onto all the way over on one left onto this one side of this stereo field, but you have different frequencies having on different sides of the stereo field, if that makes sense. So that's a thing that you can use. And another thing that is really useful, the scale here. Look at this EQ down at the bottom right-hand corner. The scale of the plugin, you can increase how much you want it to, how drastic you want the EQ adjustments that you've had to be, okay? So obviously the default is 100%, but if I want to really make it drastic, then I can boost it up to 200%. And of course, you can make any of these things show up in the automation lane. So you can draw in how much, what percent you want, and you can draw it in if you want it to change throughout the track. So that's a little helpful tip. Oh, we've got a delay loop coming in on us. Jeremy, what's $1,000 for the plugin? Find Saturn Freak for kicks. I'm a little lost. You're very welcome for the class. Sometimes you're working on a track and it gets really busy and then you accidentally just have certain parts of the track stretched out and you end up liking the parts, the more reduced parts a lot more than the busiest parts. So that's a little thing. Hey, does anybody have any other questions? I'm about to wrap things up here. Anybody have any other questions before we go? Okay, Fab Filter. Yep. Jeremy, one thing about the Fab Filter plugins is that you're able to, the nice thing about Fab Filter is that there's like these bundles that are heavily discounted, but actually if you buy individual plugins, they start, each additional plugin you buy starts getting cheaper, which I never knew. And that was kind of something that always held me back from diving into them, but now I'm really feeling these plugins. They're the best plugins that I've bought in a while. Any other questions before I sign off? this has been really fun, guys. I just enjoy doing this, and it's been great for me. So I hope that you all are getting stuff out of it. And if you are interested, I will post all of these sessions up on YouTube. I would also actually like to start streaming from YouTube, but the trick is that with streaming from YouTube, you need a certain amount of subscribers. So if you go to youtube.com/Kyle Geiger and subscribe, I never thought I'd be saying like and subscribe, but that would open up the doors a little bit from getting off of the Facebook format. I actually really like the YouTube live stream format, and if I could start doing that for everybody, I think that it would be able to, it's a little bit easier to follow the chat window, and it's nicer for interaction and whatnot. So yeah, youtube.com/Kyle Geiger, go subscribe there, and the tutorials will also be there. And I've got all the tutorials that different producers who keep sending me videos, friends of mine, are keep on giving tips, and they're giving great tips that I'm learning from as well. So keep checking that, and also send me messages. Let me know what you're thinking about and what's on your mind. I hope everybody's dealing with the quarantine all right, and I really look forward to the next time that we meet up. I hope to probably do another one later this week. So also let me know what time is best for all of you. I just want to get a gauge. I'd hate to be missing a huge crowd just because they couldn't find the time. I know a lot of you are still having to work from home and whatnot, and yeah, so just let me know. Let me know how everything's going. We will talk next time.